This is the Courier 13 podcast with Winter Andrews, a weekly think tank of in-depth conversations among rising filmmakers. My goal with this show is to showcase the innovative talent and ideas that Hollywood hasn't discovered yet. Also, for people who have watched other episodes, I normally have a poster that's normally my background. It fell and the frame broke. That's why it's not there. I just wanted people to know if they were wondering. Well, thank you so much for being here, Jasmine. Absolutely. This is where we've never met before. This is my first guest where I haven't met them before the actual recording. So this is really cool for me. I just quote discovered you through a friend of a friend, a mutual connection, someone who also lives near you. Do you live near Portland?
Yeah, I'm living around, I'm from Beaverton, and I was in Eugene for a while because I was an undergrad at U of O in Eugene. So I moved recently this last summer back home, and so I'm relatively around the Portland, Beaverton area.
Cool. Also, I think Beaverton is just a funny name for a town.
Yes,
I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Even when I was just a part of that institution, I would often just say Portland because no one knew where the hell Beaverton was unless you kind of relatively know like the districts around here. But it's not that far out from Portland. It's like maybe it used to be like a half-hour drive. Now it's like 45 plus, depending on traffic. But yeah, so that's kind of the zone I'm in region I'm in.
So I know that you are, and obviously I want to give you your chance to kind of introduce yourself and introduce what you do. I know you, or at least from what I've seen, you're a very good producer. You make very, very informative content. I mean, I want to get into the documentary that you made this last summer. But I guess who are you? What kind of filmmaker are you?
Yeah. Okay, so I always tell people when they ask me where my work derives, what my work is inspired or derivative of, and how I categorize myself in the media field, essentially, or storytelling field, at least. I like to call myself a storyteller or a creative. And I mean, I lean more towards storyteller these days because I think there's a limitation when you think of a filmmaker or a photographer, whatever you establish yourself as, like that's what people expect of you. They expect me to make a film, but I've also been a part of photography-based exhibitions and then turn around and can do, produce an audio story without visuals. And so I think I would categorize myself as a storyteller. It's very derivative of my childhood, I'd say. I homeschooled, and that was up until my 5th or 6th grade year. And I went through public schooling, like moving forward. And in that time of homeschooling, I always tell people that it's a super essential part of my story or journey as a person, because I wasn't really equipped to social cues and a lot of socially aware things that a lot of other folks were. So a lot of experience I came very much later down the line for me. And I was on a total journey for like the medical field for being a pediatrician. I was stuck on that up until my senior year of high school.
What was the end of that? I'm sorry not to interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine.
What was the end of like?
Right. Most people don't expect that.
I've never heard of that. I've never known someone who was like, I became a filmmaker, but before that, want to be a pediatrician.
Yeah, so it was actually
why'd you give that? Well, why did that turn out not to be the thing for you?
Yeah. Well, one, I appreciate you even asking that, because most time when I tell people the story, they're like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." And I'm like, "Wait, do you not hear that? That's kind of weird." Like,
I was like, wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate that acknowledgement. So yeah, it was a journey for pediatrics, and it was funny because the sole reason for my wanting to go in the medical field was the exact, if not the same reasoning for me to go into filmmaking. I would go to the doctors a lot when I was younger. I had like a lot of little things that I had to deal with younger when I was younger, so I often visited the hospital. And I asked my mom when I saw a photo on the wall of all these white doctors, and that's who I was essentially wanting to be, but I didn't see me on the wall. So
Mm.
that was kind of weird and uncomfortable, and that was at the age of 6. So my going through, the medical journey up until my senior year, and then doing a 180 was inspired by, one, the dislike for human anatomy and anything science related. I was over it. I said, if I hate it now, I'll hate it moving forward. So gotta cut that shit right now.
That does kind of end things with that.
Yeah.
If you're like,
So
if I'm
there's
not
that.
down with the human body, it's kind of
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, I don't think this is for me. And I don't think I could spend another 4 years in classes like this. And so I was like, what else am I good at? I was a really good writer. I still am, I would think. And so I was like, let's go into writing. Let's storytell journalistically through that. And I got a few scholarships from the University of Oregon, and they gave me the most scholarships money. I was originally going to go to George Fox for nursing, and they were a private school, but I was already at that point annoyed and over the medical field. So I
right.
went into U of O, and by the time I got to my freshman year, I think I went the first 2 terms just taking mostly writing classes and other courses that had nothing to do with filmmaking. And then my third term, I was in this course with one of my professors that became a mentor for the remainder of my 3 years. His name was Ed Madison. And he had a course that was primarily filmmaking via your iPhone. And that, I remember that blowing my mind, because I was like, when I think film, I associate it with um, people that have money and resources and can make something that looks really high quality. And so I was like, that's not me, because I don't have access to those things. And I used to dabble in making compilation videos and just really amateur like filmmaking in high school, but that was very like a hobby for me. I never looked at it as like a career path. And so I took his course, and by the end of that term, we had to do this final project based off of a centered issue. And we had to take, I think, one main subject and just tell this whole powerful and compelling story, sorry. And my friend and I, her name was Sephora. She is Muslim and Ethiopian, and I'm Black, like African American and not Muslim. So we had 2 different lifestyles and completely different approaches to our Blackness and how the world sees that and how we do. And we met my freshman year. So it's not like this was someone I knew already, but we would talk and have discourse surrounding our experience at a predominantly white institution. And sorry about that.
You're good.
A predominantly white institution, and we had a lot of relatabilities, and we noticed that we were curious about how we can relate so much but be so different.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, but to others, they view us both, and you see both Black people, but we're like, we have a lot of intersections that are unique to our own selves, but yet we're having the same experiences here at this institution. So we took that concept and we tried to make a parallel between 2 subjects. We pushed against our professor, and we're like, we gotta have 2 people. And he was really not into it at first, because he was like, I don't know how you're gonna do that. And I don't know your need for doing that. but go for it, and I just hope you do well, and your grade's going to suffer or not accordingly. So I was like,
Yeah,
cool. So
that's the thing about taking a filmmaking class, any filmmaking class, because it's all about following your intuition. There is no like there. I mean, they give you rubrics, but like what? I mean, how do you judge your creativity off of a rubric?
exactly.
So yeah, and then you're kind of just left in the deep end, just like, well, I'm gonna do this thing.
Yeah.
So I hope you like it. I hope it comes out well for you, which is
Yeah,
weird.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
it it's pushing beyond boundaries that I think there's a rigidness within a lot of institutions, and specifically in this sort of industry and even field, because I feel like it turns from a field when you're in college to an industry essentially, that you start thinking of it in that context. But
Mhm.
I sort of noticed the rigidness in that, and I always tell people that the most that I learned from being a journalistic major was all of how to tell a story journalistically and traditionally, and all the traditional things like you need to know, like lower thirds and how to frame and things like that. But all the
Mhm.
cool shit that I like to do and connecting with people, that comes from the self. And that's not something that they taught me. That's just something that was a part of me as a person. And obviously, like honing in on that and developing that is based primarily on networking and connecting with people. But I'll get in that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Um, so we had that story, and we took it, and we had one person that was primarily immersed in the black clubs at U of O, BSU, Umoja. It was a freshman hall for primarily Black students. It was literally a hall, so it's either you kind of knew about it or you didn't. But there was a hall that looked like you basically, and then we contrasted that with, or juxtaposed it with, another person who was in a white sorority, who experienced folks saying, wow, I didn't know you're a part of the sorority because you don't look like you're a part of that. You don't look like you're supposed to be in this sorority, with a whole other contrasted story of someone who was immersed in their community who still felt like when they walked through campus, they're being eyeballed, and for walking around with their other Black friends. And so the point of this whole story was to kind of take the idea of myself and Sephora and to tell a Black story that is very relatable but very different, because we always try to emphasize that the Black community is not monolithical. There's so many intersections for each Black experience. And by the end of it, we had a screening day for everyone's film, and Ed asked everyone if they had an opinion. He always had an opinion, so
They all do.
I was ready.
Every film
I had
professor
my
has an opinion. That's their job.
exactly,
Their job is to have
exactly,
an opinion on what you do. Yeah.
absolutely. And so then he asked if anyone had an opinion. It was just myself and I think Sephora and one other Black student. All the rest of them were white or non-Black, and almost everyone like was completely silent. Then he asked to raise your hand if that made you uncomfortable by the end of our film, and it was just about everyone in my classroom.
What
And
so what made
the
him
discomfort.
uncomfortable? Yeah, what
Yeah,
caused the
I
discomfort,
honestly think that the
in your
discomfort
opinion?
was rooted in a story that is a very much a reality that they're unfamiliar with. It was a majority of white folks in my class. They were also non-Black POC too, but um, I think that it was just the discomfort with having to sit with, wow, like I'm comfortably moving through my 4 years. I don't have to think about whether my professor is white or if I'm the only Black student in the class, or I don't have to think about any of what I just learned, but now I'm thinking about it, and that makes me uncomfortable because I never had to think about it.
Was
So,
sorry.
oh, go ahead.
No, no. So was there what was like was there necessarily a plot to your piece? Like what was your piece trying to evoke?
Yeah, so it was a try to simultaneously address the non-monolithical uniqueness to each person's Blackness.
Hmm.
This is the experience, but then there's a center, like each person dealt with racism, each person dealt with this, and both of them are living and existing in entirely different ways within the confines of this institution, while it also simultaneously addressed we had a professor at our university in blackface, and showed up in blackface, and she was a professor of the law school, which the percentage of law students that are Black was not very high. And so when that came out, that was crazy. And the person had paid leave, and they left, and got reinstated soon after. And so it was like a parallel with like, okay, yeah, these Black individuals at this white institution are feeling this discomfort, but it's on it's in an institution that's constantly promoting diversity and resources for Black and brown folks. But how are we running into things like this, where we even had to, my first year, know about and see a Blackface professor, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it was acknowledging a lot of discomforts, I think, for folks that couldn't find relatability in it. Um, just in terms of the classic 4-year college experience, where you don't have to worry about how you're just being Black, your Black self that you always, never chose to be. And so I think that's primarily the point. Um, like, does anyone else have to deal with the stairs, and just for existing? Um, so yeah, I would say that was kind of the point. And I'm more than happy to share that too with you as well if you'd like to see it. It's not on my like normal portfolio.
I would love I would love to see that film. So seriously, do share that. I'd like
Yeah.
to post that with this video. Um, what? Well, I guess I'll say two things, because that made me think of a lot of things what you were saying.
That's no problem.
I do think it's interesting,
Hmm.
very peculiar, that there are many white people who look at kind of, well, as you were talking about with the whole, they viewed your film and they got very uncomfortable.
Yeah, like to the
Well,
point where they were prompted the question and chose to raise your hand. Like that's how uncomfortable it was.
yeah, it was that viscerally uncomfortable, as if it was, say, a threat to them, or it was something that was dangerous. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, absolutely. And that's where my fire and my fuel is for my work. I want to create that. I want to create that discomfort because I didn't get to choose to learn about my history unless I was at home. I didn't get to choose to learn about somebody's or watch someone's coming of age film growing up and see myself, in a realistic reality that isn't a Hillary Duff or Lindsay Lohan, that I can very much not relate to. I didn't grow up seeing a proper representation of myself, that as a Black person, and other friends that were Black being represented properly. I had both parents growing up in my home. I didn't have a strung out Black mom and an absent father and a gang affiliated brothers. And that's the depiction you often see for someone my age growing up, and just in general. And so I was like, I've been made uncomfortable by the misrepresentation of my own personal experience, and then my community's experience depiction, because oftentimes it's not even us sitting in that chair to make those decisions. You might have representation on, visual representation, but if you don't have someone sitting at the table, this is how, this is generally goes, or a good sense of where they can do their research to attain a proper reality. I think there's a hone in on, and like such an emphasis on like representation, but that representation doesn't always look that great. And I mean, it's not up for one person. I'm not saying like one Black person or one person of color to sit in a chair and decide for the entire community, because again, as I stated earlier, the Black community isn't monolithical. And but I do think that there's more work to be done in terms of, for me, I always tell people I emphasize on the pre-production process, And that looks like research, that looks like networking, that looks like building relationships and learning. And not just slapping an idea of what you think would be okay. Like I see films that are like, I see films where there's like Black representation that are not directed by Black folks themselves. And I'm like, am I supposed to be satisfied with that? Or am I supposed to be, I guess, this is what I'm supposed to be okay with and like settle with. And I just never been great and a fan of settling at that. And so I've always been a fan of like stirring up some discomfort of some sort. And yeah,
And
I don't know how else to put it.
well, do you think that because it really is, I think what, and this is just from my perspective, definitely is very different, but do you think that I mean, I think what you're saying is that we're using the film medium, or you're using the film medium to present a discomfort that hopefully provokes awareness and a renewed understanding on a part of people who haven't experienced that perspective.
While also getting at a relatability factor. Like I want my work also to simultaneously work as content for my people where they're like, whoa, that's me. Like, or hey, that's actually realistic. And for those that don't get to say that, like I would love for them to ask themselves why, and to really like dig into that discomfort or why they felt so disconnected from a reality that very much exists for many. So it's kind of two things at play. It's like the discomfort factor for folks that aren't able to relate, and are primarily the majority, or folks that are able to be often represented or not have to worry about their representation either. And I'm like, I shouldn't watch a scary movie and I'm like, there's going to only be one Black person, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I don't think there's a white person that I've ever spoken to that they're like worried about not seeing a white person in the movie. And
well, so it's taken for granted. We don't even think about it. That's the thing. I think sometimes when the representation question is brought up, I think that an issue that occurs is some white people, when they hear it, they're like, well, what's the point? Why is that important? Like, why are we, because we unconsciously don't understand the importance of it because we've always had it.
Exactly. And that's what my goal is. My goal is to make that unconsciousness conscious. Sure. And I believe in there's a level of ignorance, but I also think that like I think I have more sympathy toward ignorance than I do to folks that have consciousness and are been consciously aware of a lot of these things and have chosen to.
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, listen, when I mean, I sympathize with anyone who is a good person, wants to be a good person, but just hasn't, but because of their life, because obviously our lives are so individual and we're trying to survive, we're trying to make our way in the world. We don't always think about that because we don't have the time or the resources to. But once it is presented to people, I think, and going back to the whole idea of like, when some people watched your film, they got scared or like uncomfortable. It's, okay, is that the right feeling that I should have by this? Or knowing that this isn't an attack, your film was not a vicious attack or an indictment on the audience. It was a, hey, could you look at this? Can we examine?
Yeah, can we talk about this? And can you sit with this? And that's always the goal for me. It's not for me to instill a guilt. I don't want to hear about how you felt bad about it. I don't want to hear, which often I've been prompted with, or how you're a good white person. You know, like I just want you to be able to take this and talk about it with your friends. You know, take it and dissect it and be able to walk away like, oh wow, there's a lot I don't know, and I should. Plain and simple.
It's just a mindset in how you react and how you take it in. It's like, yeah, because I think that's the most problematic thing with, I think, that sort of topic. It's like people have so many different perspectives spent on their race, how they've been treated by society. And the other side typically doesn't know the full side or the full story of either parties.
Yeah.
So because we're all individuals, because there is no monolithism in the Black community or the white community.
Right.
It's just we're just a bunch of people trying to figure some shit out.
Exactly.
Out with each other.
Yeah.
So I think what it is we got to stop looking at any call for action or change as
an attack.
Right? It's like if people think, oh wait, if you're pointing this out, you're indicting me, you're indicting my existence, you're indicting my way of life. I have to be resistant against that because you've come at me.
Exactly.
That's where the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah. And I'm like, if you look at history, I think a lot of Black folks, including myself, are very conscious of how my positionality in the world, how I show up, how I choose to show up, how I am perceived, how I am, like, before I even get to share myself, and to constantly be aware of that in entering or exiting different spaces or fields or jobs, like that's something like come on, dude, like imagine having to think about all that, like, and that doesn't say, and I think that's a great point that you're making about not, perceiving it as an attack, because it's not like any of my content is trying to say you don't deal with hard shit, but also a lot of your hard shit isn't rooted in historical founding, like, of my people's like suffering. So I'm like,
there's different so you're saying there's different kinds of suffering.
Yes. So it's very interesting because I'm like, that's never the goal. Like, I want a conversation. I know I'm going to have to live in a world with white people, and for that I'm like, I just want you to recognize the amount of discomfort versus comfort that I have and my people have, that you don't really have to think about entering spaces. And so it's very interesting. I've had a time with different pieces, and I've actually had a lot of folks, I feel like, that have learned and had discourse like post project, or and the thing is, it's like, it's not even that it's coming from me. Like, a lot of, like, that's where the validity is coming from. Like, I'm not a fan of identity politics, like, just because it comes from a Black person, or just because this, like, then that's what makes it valid. But most of my work is work that I'm doing that is healing me in the process. It was later down the line that I realized, you know what, I grew up in damn Beaverton, Oregon as a Black person, and I was being microaggressed, and I didn't even know it, or that was definitely super racist, didn't even notice. I was always a good noodle in school, but I definitely felt there was a spotlight on me, and I got in trouble a lot for things that I never did, based on my.
What do you mean by that? Like, what?
Oh, just in school. Like, in school, I've gotten detention a couple times for things that I've never done. Like, I've gotten, like, told that I have detention, like, for shit that I didn't do.
What would be like that you skipped class, or that you...
Oh, it was like, so there was a ceramics class I had. It was pretty funny. I had a ceramics course, and there were a whole bunch of students that would throw clay around the class, one of which I wasn't, and a shit ton of, like, kids that would do that. And it was just myself and another student that we're the only, I think the only Black kids, brown or anything, actually. I think it was the rest of the kids were white. But the only people that got detention was the Black kid, the other Black kid that was in the class. And then I got detention because the teacher thought I was throwing clay with everyone. So like just shit like that like I didn't realize or register till later. And no other kids got in trouble, by the way. There was another instance where it was like some substitute teacher, and there was a testing room that you take like makeup tests, and I was there for like the makeup day. It was like myself and I think 2 or 3 other students. And they had us doing a makeup test in that room. And then the next day I get called into the office, and the teacher's like, oh, like there was some like it was like a legal thing with this girl on her phone, and like she was like texting like these like grown ass men, like, and I was like, bro, I didn't even know that girl. But it was because I was in the same room taking my fucking test that I got detention. So it was kind of weird. And the way they framed it was like you were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'm like, but I really wasn't. I was doing what I was doing.
You're
So
just doing your academic.
exactly. So I was like, what else am I supposed to believe that as, especially if I didn't have any sort of record prior of like being a trouble kid or anything like that. And then this girl told my principal one time that I beat her up, me and this other girl. I've never been in a fight. So I was like, what? So there's that, like, and she was crying like in the office, like, and everything. I was super confused. And apparently she told the principal that I and like 2 other students beat her up, and it never happened. And then the girl transferred like the next day. So it was kind of weird. And it was really unsettled. But there was just like instances like that I was like, wow, I didn't even realize like the amount of microaggressions that would take place, and just really subliminal racism that would take place in just my schooling alone. And so when I storytell, I often tell people it's kind of healing. Like it's a process and healing process for my own self too, and for like my own people that view it. Like I view my content, I just hope that they find some resignation and some solace in whatever they can take away, or relate to. Because yeah, like a lot of folks can be so aware of their Blackness, but not to the degrees that an institution might make you aware of it. And so that was super interesting and very pivotal time, my freshman year of college and moving forward and just storytelling. So yeah, it's derivative a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of filmmakers will say if, they grew up differently, maybe they wouldn't make the films that they would eventually make. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that it would almost be impossible for you to not be making the films that you make,
Right.
given your experiences growing up?
Right. Right. It was almost inevitable to storytell in that way. And it's funny because all I'm doing is choosing this medium. And like I mentioned earlier, like I was going to go into journalism writing. And so I would used to write a lot of poetry. I used to write a lot about really the same things, but very underdeveloped personal politics of my own, and having that be developed when I was in a Black feminist course, or when I learned more about me and my own people, I think too, and the validity in my experiences that were often dismissed or told that actually that's not racist, it's just what it is. And that's what I often got told. And I was like, actually, no, I think those were pretty fucking racist. And so realizing that too, and I think it was inevitable for me to choose some medium. I didn't realize it was going to be filmmaking before I was, built up in by Ed Madison and told that, maybe you shouldn't label yourself as an amateur because you don't have an amateur style of storytelling, and connecting with people. And so having that really pushed me into this medium. I think I was going to tell my story or stories of my people regardless.
Yeah. So do you think, I mean, and obviously I think, did that gravitate you towards the story that you made, that you produced, the documentary show that you produced last summer? Do you
Yeah,
think that
I can
was,
definitely speak on it.
yeah,
Yeah. So the
well,
last stop in the shop.
yes, Last Stop in the
Um,
Shop. And who was you produced it with, that you were backed by, what was
yeah, I had an exec producer, and that was Jan Boyd. She works with Oregon Public Broadcasting, and then I also worked with Aria, Suri Joyo. Yeah, Suri Joyo.
how did
And
you meet those individuals?
yeah, so it's actually pretty funny. So a lot was supposed to happen this last summer. I was supposed to be in Ghana actually for the first half of summer, interning through the journalism school, and we were just supposed to be at a news outlet, basically producing content. And then I was going to come back to Portland and intern for Oregon Public Broadcasting through an internship called Snowden. And Snowden allots, I think it was like 15, maybe a little bit more folks that got all personally assigned to different media outlets.
Mhm.
And one of their best outlets were OPB. And so I got chosen for that one after going through 2 interview processes. One is with professors of that program, Snowden, that operate it. And then the second one is through whoever wants to take you for the summer. So it was OPB. And upon the pandemic's arrival, I was originally supposed to spend half and half summer, but then after that, they were like, you know what? How about we just give you the full 10 weeks? That was the timeline for the internship anyway. And so I spent 10 weeks with OPB, and before I worked for them, they asked me what kind of work I like to do and what I wanted to do. And I was like, I don't want to do an internship where I'm grabbing coffee for folks. I don't want to be doing this internship during a social turmoil for my people right now, and I don't want to do that thinking that I have to come into this internship and talk in the diversity, equity, inclusion clubs. Like I don't want to feel like I'm obliged to that. And she, all right off the bat, she was like, all of that's your choice. Like she's like, all of that's your choice. And the cool thing is that she actually prompted it before I even had to explain that, which I found comfort in, because oftentimes I have to state that myself. And so I found comfort in that. And so I started working with Jan and Aria, and I became their production assistant. And so I would go on different shoots for different folks' projects and just be a second camera. And then my supervisor, which was Aria, and the big boss was Jan. He was like, I want you to produce a story that you just want to do, because they already knew the type of things that I like to do based off my resume and all that. And he was like, I want you to really do your research and all of that, whatever that looks like, and then propose it. And then he was like, try to get the proposal past the proposal period and get it approved by Jan, and let's roll with it. So I thought long and hard, because I was like, okay, it's a pandemic. I was like, everyone's doing pandemic stories. I was like, everyone's doing a pandemic story, a corona story. And, I was like, what's something I haven't seen? So initially my idea wasn't even Last Stop in the Shop. I had an idea of looking at Portland, like what does Portland look after the social turmoils and the pandemic? What would it look like to have a healthy Black community in which folks are constantly protesting at the time, and especially during the summer about? And so my approach was going to be 3 profiles, stories of someone looking at past Portland, in that there has been protests in history in Portland. There has been a lot of injustices toward the Black community and gentrification and so on and so forth in the community, that the present day is not so surprising. And so to kind of segue from that into present day, and this is what we're fighting for. And then for someone that has been on the front lines. And then the third perspective would have been someone very much younger, um, looking at what they want Portland to look like. Because I mean, there has to be a goal. Um, and so I was going to do that story, and we messed up my timeline for my internship. So we thought that I had like way shorter of a time. So he was like, you're going to have to dial back the ambition a little bit. And he was like, just in terms of time. And then there's all these COVID protocols that need to be taken in place and considered when filming. So there was a whole multiplicity of things at hand.
Well, so I just want to, just because I think for people watching, that's such an important thing, because I know so many filmmakers who are hesitant to do work because of the challenges of filming with COVID. Is that even is that fear even valid? Like how was it for you? How did you guys go about that?
Yeah, that fear is absolutely valid. I originally told stories this last summer virtually, and then when I came upon the story for Paul Jr. and Sr., because I ended up changing my approach. I wanted to tell a story about someone who has been immersed in their community and is dealing with the sufferings of a pandemic in a community that is often highly suffocating from pandemics and whatnot. And so I was doing a whole bunch of research about Black businesses going out of business in Portland. And it looked like I only saw a few articles, but it was a 30-year existing shop. And I was like, this is the only thing that I see. It was like a little like news sectors of like Coin 6 showing, just like a quick shot of the shop and maybe a little soundbite or two of Paul Knowles and Jr. And I was like, this is 30 years of history. And this is the only type of thing that they got. And so I looked into contacting both Paul Jr. and Sr. And I was very much weary of COVID. I had a lot of anticipated shots that I wanted to get. Like I wanted to get the shot of them coming into the shop and being in the same car doing so. So that was obviously a restriction. And I kept my mask on the entire time. We did 6 feet apart filming. We were never super close, and they were very, very responsive and helpful in terms of archival footage and archival photographs of just their history in the shop. And so it was kind of weird because I was like, I don't know when to put this out, because I felt like there was so much like negative content that I was like, and then the wildfires took place. So around the time that I finished my final cut and got it all approved and my internship was concluding, the wildfires began. So then there was wildfire coverage. But then the pandemic was still existent and all the social justice movements were still happening. So I was like, this would be good once the wildfires are gone. And yeah, it ended up being a beautiful story, but I don't think it would have been anything had I not built a relationship with the two of the folks. So
once you built that relationship with the owners, and I mean this is a very, for them, for the owners of the shop, it was a very deep, you're telling the story of this Black owned business in Portland that has lasted for so long and is so coveted by the community. And now with COVID, the onset of the pandemic, it's, going to probably close down and be taken over by hopefully another Black family.
yes.
So
and it is, yeah.
And at the conclusion of the film, I didn't want to spoil it, but I guess we're spoiling.
No, it's
okay. That does happen, which was again it was a very heartwarming and very touching story. One, what was it like working with the owners?
Yeah.
How did you convince them? Was there any apprehension for them to tell the story? Were they fully on board immediately?
So it was actually really interesting because I contacted Paul Knowles Jr. for an initial interview, just to get kind of a scope of he would be a good subject. And I really got lucky. He shared so much, but not he wasn't a rambler. He was a storyteller himself. And I
Yes,
think
you can
that's
tell that all of them on
yes,
something.
yes.
Everyone who spoke in that documentary short, they were able to captivate you and
Yes.
engage with you just by sitting down in a chair and talking.
Yes, exactly. So he was a storyteller and that was virtually. And so I think we talked for maybe half an hour or so, and that was our first time encountering one another. And so I concluded the interview, ran to my supervisor and I was like, we have to film this dude. I said, but I was really hoping that his father, Paul Knowles Sr., because he's pretty well known. He was known in the Portland community a lot, most especially for the Northeast Black community for social activism. He was always showing up. Um, and I was like, I really want to see him because he was also in an OPB historical documentary and he had a lot to say as well. And I was like, I want it to be a different angle at his story, essentially. And so he was on board too. It took a little bit of prying because he was older in one of the at risk groups, and so there was some hesitancy there.
Right.
But I think they felt more comfortable that it was going to be in a public setting, like a shop, than it would have been if I was at their homes, which is also another shot that I wanted to get. I wanted to see them and do portrait shots in their element, like what they are in before they come to work, because they've made their home other people's home through the shop.
Mhm.
And so I didn't get to do those, but I did make do and I was able to get there. It was actually very last minute. I got a call from Paul Jr. on his own, and he was like, "We're taking down mirrors and we're taking down a whole bunch of stuff tomorrow." And this is like before I had my proposal approved and all of that. And so I ran to my
Yeah, yeah.
supervisor, like, what? Yeah, I was like, what should I do? And so he's like, we have to talk to Jan. He was like, you have to get out there and film. So I was scared that she would just debunk it and was like, nah, like you don't have enough time. But she was a huge fan of, like, I think our just her initial ways of knowing me and realizing that I really am an open book and just very raw into the cut. And so I think she trusted that I wouldn't just say there's a story if there wasn't a story. And so she was like, go ahead. So she let me film without a proposal approval. And that was insane because I had one day to film. So I filmed that entire documentary in one day. Um, that was insane and scary and hot and sweaty because it was like midsummer. Um, and it was cool because I felt like because I had established that relationship initially and just talking to them and picking their brain, that they gave me that access points into their lives to do that. And to come on and take down day and to have things for me to capture. And then furthermore, shots that weren't really released. There were shots of Paul Knowles Sr. sitting and like taking out portraits of a lot of memories that were happened at the shop and just in his timeline and like his life. And so they very much just liked to storytell, and they were big fans of basically having people remember their shop because they remember all their customers. And so yeah, they said they closed primarily because of the pandemic. Um, but they said that it was also because he was reaching an older age, and he was like, I think it was just, he was like, my time to go anyway, and this pandemic gave me another reason to close shop, especially with their care for their community. They were like, we don't want them to come home, essentially, and be in our home, our community home, and leave sick. So yeah.
I get that. You wanted to, because I mean, you get that sense from the piece that he knew it was time to stop,
Yeah.
and he
Hmm.
didn't seem, well, I don't know if I would say he was happy about it. He didn't seem in pain
Right. he seemed at peace with his decision.
Yes.
He very much seemed at peace with it. And I got that sense as well when I interviewed him. Because I was like, are you sad? Like 30 years is a long time. And it was
life.
Yeah, and it was named after his wife, and there's so much history in that, and so I think he was just kind of like, I think it's good because they have a whole other story about it was called the Cotton Club. They had a cotton club before Geneva's, and celebrities would come in through. It was like a nightclub, and it was really cool. And they explained that they're going to tell that story on their own because they're working on a documentary themselves. And so I think he said, I feel like he just felt at peace because he had lived so much life through experiences with his wife and then having an establishment prior to this 30-year existing business anyway, that I think he was just kind of like, I'm chill with it closing. Like, it sucks because obviously the memories, the place itself, and, the customers coming in and out, like, as he mentioned, but I think he was really at peace, which was, I think, made it more beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, again, very, I mean, with all of the news that had come out during this entire, I would say just this entire 2020 year, that was one of the few pieces about COVID where I was, watching it and I was like, well, this kind of makes me feel
like a little happy, a little bit of like peace. Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't want it to be that. I didn't want it to be a sad story. I was telling my supervisor, like, I didn't want it to be, we're hearing stories about this all the time. We're hearing places being replaced, and businesses being pushed out. Like, I think another beautiful factor was that they were very intentional about who was going to next, for the very aware, like their awareness basically of gentrification and its history in Portland, and they didn't want to fall victim to that. And that, I think, was powerful for just myself as like another Black person in their community, who personally didn't have any ties to the shop, but my dad apparently had ties to the shop.
How so?
That was interesting. Yeah, so I guess he networked with both Paul Knowles Jr. and Sr. My dad is very for years he's been very immersed into the Portland community because right now he's currently DJing for the Portland Trail Blazers. But
that's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sometimes I forget, because not that he does, but I forget that, like, when I say it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's pretty cool. But before that, I think it's because I've always seen my dad as like a mentor, because before he was with the Trailblazers, he DJ'd for Nike and whatnot, but he was a mentor for this program called Self-Enhanced Corporation. And then he also was a peer counselor, or a counselor for, or maybe it's a coordinator. I don't really know the titles. I'm like, anything beyond the film industry, I'm like, I don't know, but some important title that helped kids that helped kids out, like he was that for, I think, like over 15 years. And then when I wasn't born and my brothers weren't yet, he had a program of his own called Gang Peace in the 90s in Oregon. And he ran that for a couple of years, and it was a program to basically allow access for folks that were, give access to folks that were in underdeveloped communities access to things that they wanted to do. So they would mentor kids, have them go through different classes, whatnot, for whatever that is, just leadership development mostly and primarily. But he would do that prior. So he did all that for like years. And he was working in these different areas for years. And that just happened to be around where Paul Knowles Jr. and Paul Knowles Sr.'s community presence was at the time, and they just crossed paths. And so when I told my dad about the story, he was like, wait, he's like, I know who those people are. And so that was pretty funny, and also really cool because they had no idea that I was his daughter. So when I told them at the end of the interview, they were pretty stoked about that, because they were like, he's a really good friend of ours. And so I'm kind of glad that I didn't know, because I was like, that kind of is a flex on my storytelling, because they were really open about a lot, you know, and like they didn't need to know that, you know, my dad, you know, so yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Wow. Wow. No, I did not, I had no idea about that. That must have made it really surreal at the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very, very surreal. And it was just like, it was just, yeah, it was very interesting, because I was like, I wonder if it would have changed had they known that we were kind of connected in some weird way. Um, and I don't think it would have. I think they just happened to be really good storytellers, and
Yeah.
um, I think I was a pretty solid interviewer. I think I asked the right questions. So yeah, give
I mean,
myself that pat on my back.
yeah, yeah. You got a very compelling story out of them, and it's shot very well. I
Thank
mean, it was
you.
very well shot. So were you were the producer? Were you also, who shot it? Were you also the director?
Yeah,
I've never done documentary filmmaking.
yeah,
I
I
don't know what
filmed
it's like.
everything.
What? Say that
I
again?
filmed everything.
You filmed everything. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
So
I
you were
filmed
the
all the
director
people
also.
and I shot the interview, but I I was like, I can't remember, because everyone's like, what did you shoot with? I was like, why can't I remember what I shot with? I know it was a Canon, um, but it was so rushed. That time was just so blended for me, because I had like
How many shoot
a
days did
day.
you have? A day.
I had a
Just one day.
day. Yeah, I had a day to
That all
decide.
took place in one.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, I had a day to film all of that. I had a day. So my supervisor just showed up, gave me a camera, was like, capture what you can. He was really, really a great guide. And he's also an awesome filmmaker as well. And I was really honored to have him as my supervisor, because he also was just like a very raw storyteller and believed in like the creative approach too. Like he just as much liked to make things look cool as much as I did, but also very much cared about the pre-production process and what the story means to me, and why do I want people to feel anything and what I want them to feel. So we worked really well together, but it was all super fast, because it was in a day, and they were
Yeah.
taking down the mirrors that day in the shop. So really, after the mirrors came down, they had one chair, the one that you see spinning in the dock. That is the chair that was there the longest, and it was Geneva's chair.
Mm,
And so that's like, it was kind of unimplied, because it wasn't able to be fit in that story, which I kind of wish they were able to talk about it, and they
yeah.
did. But it's just a whole bunch of things that I had to edit down. Like I really had to make it concise and really make a solid point, because I really could have done a whole series really on both of them alone. And I think that was super hard, cutting down, getting the script and choosing the sound bites, and the order was never a problem, but I just like, you know what, I just don't want it to just suffice. You know, I want them to be satisfied with it. And they were really, really happy with how the story was. And that's always a great feeling. Especially if you're putting your heart out essentially. So yeah, it was really cool.
What do you, I mean, man. Yeah, I've the quickest I've shot anything is 4 days, and we shot like a 15-minute horror short.
Oh
That
yeah,
was
horror shorts are so difficult though, I've heard. I've never made one myself, but I've heard they have some complexities.
But I mean, with any shoot though, it's like setup always seems to take longer than you think.
Right.
You know, and I guess for your situation, you know, you at least had the one location
Right.
at the barber shop, yeah, and you know, and you sort of had your ideas of where to go about it, but that must have been extremely nerve-wracking and difficult
Yeah,
to get everything and feel confident that you're getting everything that you need in the moment that you're getting it, if that makes sense.
absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. It's it was definitely nerve-wracking. I think I spent like 4 or 5 hours filming, um, because I had to schedule with Paul Jr. when he was going to the shop, if his dad was going with him, if they both were okay with being interviewed, and I had a time contingency with Paul Sr. I think he had to dash after maybe just 1 hour, and I think and you're right about the setup. I think about 20 of that hour I had, like 20 minutes of that hour I had with him was gone because I had to set up like longer than I realized.
Yeah.
So we had realistically about 40 minutes, maybe even a little less. And so I really had to think about just what do I really, really want to hear about this story that I can't find, you know, about everything I researched about both of them as individuals and the shop itself. And so I had to really be intentional about everything.
Yeah.
The people that came in, I was talking to them too in terms of who took down the mirrors. So the cleaners, all of those folks, like I talked to them. And so I think too is like mostly communication. Um, because I've seen a lot of instances where I filmed with someone and they just kind of like, if it's here, then I'll guess I'll capture it, but if you don't, and or if it's in my plan, I'll capture it. But I think you just got to go for everything you see or as potential.
You
And
were
so,
following your intuition at that point more so than a set shot list or a set idea.
right, exactly. So I'm like, I didn't know there was going to be 2 cleanup guys. I didn't know that the mirrors were going to be taken down that day. I just was told the shop was closing this day. I didn't really know what I was going to capture, but I do have the ability to ask, hey, when is this happening? Or when will I see this happening? So I know I can be there right there and ready. So I saw the first mirror get taken down, but that guy, he was like in and out of the shop. So I had to communicate with him as well and ask him kind of like, what's your time frame when you come back? So I didn't have an interview I was doing in the middle of needing to capture him taking the mirrors down. And so just like I think it was communication, I think that was just needed to be a little bit like thought through a little bit and just like kind of go for it, because I think otherwise I would have just kind of been asked out for B-roll and just anything to supplement the beautiful interviews.
Well, yeah, you could have. You could have just held on to those interviews. I mean, those interviews were so
Right.
good, but everything else that you got really, and it didn't feel like you were just throwing us random shots and stuff, and then it was a mangled mess and it had no
Right.
direction, if you will.
Thank you. I wanted it to be smooth, because one, I felt like they too were smooth and they're really cool guys. They're so both of them were so goofy. They were like a younger and older each other. And so they had a really nice bond, and I kind of wanted to show that through what I showed them doing. Like when I showed Paul Knowles just like chilling, leaning back with his cool outfit, like just on the phone or something like that. And then like I was like, I want these people to see who's going to take these businesses on and not just speak of it as like a concept. So I waited in this long ass line for Key's Loaded Kitchen to film her interacting with her customers. Um, People love her food, and people traveled from like Seattle to come eat her food. And so that's who's going to occupy the building with Joe's Caramel Corn, and both of which I didn't know. I didn't know either of them. So it was just a just shot in the dark. I just went up to her window and I was like, I'm doing a story for X, Y, and Z. It was nice to have developed a relationship already with Paul Knowles Sr. and Jr. because they're known in their community. So that was really my access point. To have access to them is to have access to her, essentially. So I got some really cool shots with her. Then I was also given a free meal. That was really cool. Like at the end of filming, I was heading to my car and then they just like brought me a whole bunch of food. That was really cool. So there was that. And then for Joe's Brown Caramel Corn, I was like, I don't know what my limits are, but I just gotta go for it. So I went in the shop and I was like, can I film you? And this is why. And they were down for it. And so, yeah, I think it's just kind of just going for it. Like a lot of it is really just going for it. And then I was just looking like a weirdo too, looking like a little bit of a weirdo, like setting up my tripod to get shots of just like the streets in the neighborhood. Like that's always awkward because so that I think it's just mostly going for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would, yeah, it's going for it. I mean, as you did in that scenario, and it's getting out of your own way egotistically,
Yeah.
just like say like, hey, no, this is the right way to go about it. Fuck any plans we have. Let's do this. Sorry, I swore. I remember the last episode I did. We said like fuck so many times, and I was
Oh
like,
yeah, no, I
in
said
this
like I
interview,
said a few this time, and I was like, whoops, like, but I was like, you know,
I'm not gonna
sometimes,
edit it out. Like it's not.
sometimes.
Um. Well, this has been so interesting. I know you have other things to do.
Yes.
I know you have other places to be. I do want, just so that the people know, what do you have coming up next? Do you have an idea of what's going to happen next?
Yeah, so I think for me, I tell people like a lot of folks now that my internship is concluded and now that I'm really in my post grad like journey, I'm just taking on opportunities and for versatility purposes. I I recently did a passion project that was also for a grant because one of the things or the downsides of not being in either of those institutions, OPB or U of O, is the reliance on your own resources and my own equipment. So I'm like currently in the process of just building that up. That way I can just be freelance really. And so I just did a recent piece. It was an Indian adaptation ghost story for a theater called Shaking the Tree in Portland. And it was a horror series, basically just different storytelling things and whatnot. But just besides dabbling in and taking on opportunities here and there, I probably will just be building up a lot of passion projects that I now have the time for that I didn't have to have the time for when I had 2 jobs in a week's worth of classes.
Right.
So yeah, I think that it's a lot of me that sort of freedom in that way. And then just talking to a few folks that I'm networking with right now for freelancing for folks potentially. I don't want to spoil it right now. So I'm just kind of like vaguely speaking. But right. Yeah. Hopefully I'm hoping more work like this.
Yes, I hope so too. I hope you make more work like this, and I'm excited to see it. So
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
It meant so much for me that you came out and decided to do this, not knowing me and just taking a leap of faith to just do this.
I was like, you know what? Cool. And then I also saw Chicago and I was like, that's dope. Like, I've always been very admirable of Chicago. I've always like made it sort of a goal. Like, I'm like, either I'll move to Chicago or I'll move to New York. Like, there was just like the only 2 things that I ever talked about. So I was like, you know what? Might as well just kind of do it. Why not?
Well, so, now you've made it. You've kind of made it, but you haven't.
Yes.
You sort of made it.
Yeah.
Chicago welcomes you with open arms.
Thank you.
Normally, I mean, I know I gotta let you go, but if it's all right if I ask you one quick question.
Yeah, that's fine.
My last question for you is, why do you do this? I know we've already talked about this.
Yeah.
As I think a lot of people don't know is like filmmaking is one of the greatest things you can ever do, but it's not glamorous all the time.
Yeah.
It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of gritty work, especially with production. Why do you keep coming back to it? Why are you still in this game?
I do it for my younger self, and I do it for the ancestors before me who did their verbal histories and written truths for me. You know, I imagine that they had the thought that this is going to exist beyond my years, and they were satisfied that someone else was going to be able to attain that knowledge and use it for good or use it for strategically, you know. And so when I actually filmed The Last Stop in the Shop, I thought I'd had that thought after seeing it a few times when it was like up and out into the public. I was like, wow, like this is history. Like, this is a shop that's never going to be again. And so to think of it in that context, I think even when editing it, I was like, I want to do it justice to the point where someone looks back at this and wishes that they had sat in that chair or had the chance to meet these two as well. So I think I keep doing this for my younger self, but also the ancestors before me that really documented history in a very different way for me to utilize.
I think that's a very good reason.
Thank you.
Well, Jasmine, thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed
I
this.
have. I really have. This was a great morning. I need to go get some grubs, but
I'm also I'm a little hungry myself. I think I'll go out and get a sandwich or something. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
absolutely. Nice to re-meet you. And I would love to stay connected if possible. Yeah.
No, I would absolutely love that. I will definitely continue to follow your work, and hopefully when either you come to Chicago or I, for whatever reason, come to Oregon or just
Yeah.
the West Coast in general, let's meet up and let's do something. I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be down. Like for real. Okay.
No, for 100%. Thank you so much, Jasmine.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Likewise.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.